Hey guys, first Regardsman here, and today I want to talk about the current state of Space Marine 2 and its future regarding things like a Year 3 plan and even Space Marine 3. Space Marine 2 has been out for over a year and a half at this point, and the community sentiment on the state of the game seems to flip-flop an awful lot between patches. I've seen a lot of players say the game is dying, dead, or underperforming, so I want to discuss this today and just give my overall thoughts on where the game is headed and its post-launch support. This game's initial success came as a huge shock to both Saber and Games Workshop. Space Marine 2 sold over 2 million copies in its first 24 hours and around 4.5 million by the end of the first month, and more recently the game has hit 12 million total unique players, so to say that this game was a major success compared to Focus Entertainment's initial projections would be an understatement, directly coming out to say that Space Marine 2 sales surpassed their wildest dreams, and this on top of Games Workshop's pressure is likely why Space Marine 3 was announced half a year after this game came out originally. This brings me to the post-launch support for the game. Even prior to the massive launch success, Space Marine 2 always had plans for post-launch support with a year 1 plan available right off the bat. This gave us new operations, new enemies, and weapons, though I will say that a huge portion of Year 1 update plans really felt like it was mostly fixing issues from launch. Saber has also been pretty adamant that this game is not a live service model, which is kind of bullshit if you ask me. I mean, we don't have a premium currency or battle pass system with endless forms of MTX, and if that is your definition of a live service game, I guess technically this is not one. But it does have multiple roadmaps now, season passes, a daily plus weekly accolade grind on top of post-launch DLCs, both attached to season passes, and independent ones like the voice pack DLC. It is kind of ridiculous to say they aren't trying to monetize a post-launch player base with promises of new content, and even if it doesn't check every single requirement of other live service games, it is for all intents and purposes a live service game to some degree, and it's kind of insane for Saber to continuously say this is not a live service, at least in my opinion. Especially after Year 2 is revealed, where Saber made a pretty massive step forward in terms of a post-launch content release schedule compared to Year 1, and this really brings us to the topic as to whether or not the game is dead. This is something I've seen a lot of people bring up in this game's community, that the game is struggling. I see a lot of players say things that the game is nearing the end of its content life cycle, and people have been saying this for over a year, and I'll be real, I don't know where people are getting this sentiment or information from, because it's definitely not the post-launch support of Year 2 compared to Year 1. Year 2 was really when this game hit its stride. The anniversary patch 10 was at the time the biggest post-launch patch in the game's history, only slightly beaten in peak player counts on Steam by the most recent Tech Marine update. We're only halfway into Year 2, and we've already had 2 new melee and range weapons added to the game, 3 new operations, and 2 new mission bosses, and an entirely new heroic weapon tier. And another boss is coming on the way for all missions in patch 13, and another new weapon as well, not to mention an entirely new class was also added in patch 12. And to put that in perspective, the entirety of Year 1 had 2 secondary weapons added, 0 new melee or range weapons, 3 operations with 1 mission boss, and an undercooked siege mode, with the best update being arguably the prestige update, as that added far more substantial content than the new game mode. Year 2 is pretty much just strictly better in terms of content drops compared to Year 1, and the player count, at least on Steam, reflects that, as the average amount of players in Year 2 has been higher than Year 1, with substantially larger peaks as well. I see people bring up all the time that the peak player count for Space Marine 2 is over 200,000 players at launch, and obviously an average of 10 to 15k daily players is a substantial decrease from that, but this is just how games work. Almost all player bases for games lose 85 to 90% of their player base post-launch, as the initial flood of players move on to different games and the more dedicated player base takes over outside of major patch releases. Even if we look at what is by far the most popular horde shooter in the past 10 years, or arguably ever, which is Helldivers 2, that game is nowhere near its peak player count anymore, and Space Marine 2 is a far more niche title than that is. In the case of Space Marine 2, the idea the game is ramping down its content drops when the updates for this year are more substantial than Year 1, and there are more players now than in Year 1 as well, and the game is now more widely available on consoles, thanks to it now being accessible on both Xbox Game Pass and PlayStation Plus. I think Saber made a pretty massive push in Year 2, especially for Tech Marine, to get more new players into the game, as we saw major reveals for Tech Marine, which was the most pushed update in the game's history, directly coincide with Space Marine 2's launch of Game Pass and availability on PSN Plus shortly thereafter. You could make the argument the game is entering its try for free phase, which can be a sign that a game is in the decline, which we've seen with a few other titles. And just to go over the flip side of this topic, while yes, we have had more content drops in Year 2 compared to Year 1, that is not saying that all content drops are perfect or that more content equals better content. We had a DLC voice pack as an additional purchasable DLC this year, and that was met with the most backlash by the community out of any content drop we have seen, DLC or otherwise, in year 1 or year 2, and this one did feel like Focus was trying to push the player base a bit to see what they could actually get away with in terms of additional DLC quality and price points. They found out very quickly that Space Marine 2's player base will not stand for egregiously bad DLCs, and as a result, the Voice Pack DLC is now free, and they gave out refunds to everyone, which was a pretty huge community victory considering they probably would have made more DLCs of this quality if nobody said anything, especially for Space Marine 3 in the future. And as far as what my expectations are for the future of this game, I think we should expect a similar level of content drops post year 2, and I'll go more into the reasons why I believe that based on earnings reports and other publisher comments shortly. But we already know that 2 heroic weapon variants are coming for every single weapon option in Space Marine 2, and there is no way that is actually happening if content drops stop after the year 2 roadmap, especially since we were supposed to be getting a new weapon in patch 13, so some type of post-launch support is pretty much guaranteed for the game regardless of a year 3. This was the case with Saber's other game, World War Z, which still gets updates to this day despite a significantly smaller player base than Space Marine 2 has currently. In fact, one of the only major titles Saber's ever properly shut down long-term support for was the Evil Dead game, but that game's player base was exceptionally low. We know that Space Marine 3 will have a 4-year dev cycle just like Space Marine 2 did, which would put the release date at like 2029, which is a ways away. The team that is currently working on Space Marine 2 is often referred to as a skeleton crew. This is a separate team from the one that originally developed the game, and that definitely explains a lot of the major balance changes we've had from the game's original design in the past year. I'm actually more worried for the future of balance in Space Marine 3 compared to Space Marine 2, since the game currently is in a significantly better spot than it was at launch. And if Space Marine 3 launches with similar balance to Space Marine 2, especially after years of playing a version of Space Marine 2 that is presumably even better than the one we have now with multiple balance patches, I think players are going to be disappointed and not want to wait another 1 to 2 years for Space Marine 3 to reach a similar level of quality as Space Marine 2 at the end of its life cycle. But as far as a year 3 is concerned for this game, Saber has already said that Space Marine 2 support is a long-term plan. Year 1's performance was more than enough to greenlight year 2, and year 2 so far has performed significantly better than the majority of year 1. And considering the launch of Techmarine was a massive success and we saw slightly higher player counts on Steam than even patch 10, alongside all new players from Xbox Game Pass and PSN Plus coming in as well, the likelihood of a year 3 is pretty high. But the most important indicator of a Space Marine 2 year 3 plan is taking a look at the actual money of these companies, which in this case would be the earnings report of Focus Entertainment's parent company, Pull Up Entertainment. In their earnings report for 2025, their revenue for new releases was actually down 70% in the third quarter, and their major profit driver in 2025 was in fact their backlog of games, with Space Marine 2 at the forefront as one of the most major profit drivers of the company. And even with the release of Toxic Commandos from Saber a little while ago, I imagine Space Marine 2 is still pulling them in a lot of money this year as well. And that really is the biggest indicator you'll get for anything regarding content drops in a game like this, because at the end of the day, even though Space Marine 2's monetization plan is very consumer friendly, with all the gameplay content coming out for free, including new classes with only cosmetics as paid DLC, these are for-profit companies, and if something is making them money, that is where they are most likely going to focus their efforts. So given the performance of Space Marine 2's year 2 plan, their earnings report having the game as a major profit driver, and just prior developer and publisher comments on future content for the game, I'd say that year 3 is very likely to be coming to Space Marine 2, and we are also getting an updated roadmap to the game fairly soon as well, which is supposed to have some major changes to the current one we have. Not to mention the most major Warhammer 40k gaming event, Warhammer Skulls, is also going to be happening next month, so we'll probably be getting even more information there for not just Space Marine 2, but also things like Dawn of War 4 and Total War Warhammer 40k. And I see many people say things like Space Marine 2 wouldn't be as popular as it is if it wasn't 40k, but in my opinion, that just means the game found its niche and target audience, which is 40k fans. And the game has kind of just become a hub for people who love Warhammer 40k lore and armor customization to have a fun backdrop to play as one of the most popular factions in the setting. With that being reflected with the main character of the campaign, Dimitri and Titus, also being pushed to the forefront of not only their games, but also their animations like Secret Level on Amazon Prime, and even the tabletop with the reveal of 500 Worlds with the box set narrative campaign, that will probably have major implications for the story of Space Marine 3 as well. But let me know what your guys' opinion on this is. Do you think that Space Marine 2 is a dying or struggling video game? Are you worried about the future of content drops? I will admit the remainder of year 2 does look a little bit lackluster compared to the first half, and I think they were really banking on the anniversary patch and Tech Marine update to perform well. But like I said before, we are getting an updated roadmap, so we'll have to see how substantial that one is, and I'm also curious to hear the community's opinion on this one. But that's pretty much everything I wanted to say in this video. Year 3 is looking pretty bright for Space Marine 2 in my opinion. If you want to see coverage of patch 13 and all the new content, you can find it here on this channel as usual. And if you want to catch me live to ask me questions about the game or just come hang out, you can find me here on YouTube or on Twitch with a link in the video description, alongside a link to my community Discord. And if you like content like this, subscribe for more. And as always guys, thank you for watching, take it easy, bye.